Welcome back, guys. I'm Zell, and today we're looking at an EDC classic, the Kershaw Knockout. Well, there she is, guys, our Kershaw Knockout, and this happens to be the 18700 LB-LK model, which gives you the olive handles and the black blade. If I were going to purchase one, I would get the black handles and the satin blade, just because the coating on this blade is not the greatest. It seems to wear some, and it definitely hinders your cutting, but it sure looks cool. Anyhow, like I said, we're aluminum here. We've got kind of about a half or a little more back spacer, so we do have a partial flow through. And our pocket clip is Kershaw's waterfall style deep carry pocket clip, 4-position, tip up, tip down, left or right. And as we saw over here on this side, the female side of our pivot screw is that hex that Kershaw likes to use, and I like it too. I wish Kershaw would use it more often. And we have what makes it a knockout, the subframe lock. And we'll get more into that here in a minute. On this side of the knife, we have some flourishes cut in the aluminum, which is very nice. And Kershaw has pretty darn good hardware on this one. They all seem to have deep enough recesses for the Torx that you shouldn't be goofing up your Torx drivers or the screws. And we are 4 3/4 inches long with a nice thin 0.4 for handle thickness, but a Spyderco-ish 1.54 in height. So this is not a really thin little small knife, or really short little small knife, I should say. It's going to take up a little bit of your pocket, as we'll see here in a minute. And speaking of pockets, what do you know? We've got a pair of Levi's here. And we can stick that guy down in there. And if you've got it fully bedded, there's not a lot of knife showing. And it does take up a fair amount of your pocket. But it's pretty thin, so, you know, that's kind of up to you. Our flip up there, kind of hard to see. Our flip up is a little bit higher than I'd like to see, but not bad overall. And I've carried this knife some, and it does not seem to get caught on things, get lifted out of the pocket, or get the pocket clip bent around, or bang on things, which is great. Alright, so for a little size comparison, let's open this guy up. That is the full-length Knockout. Here we have your Spyderco Delica, of course. And we'll throw a Dragonfly in there. So it's definitely bigger than your Delica. It's on the larger side for an EDC knife for most people. Have a 0450. And, of course, our Rat Model 1. And it is really smaller and thinner than a Rat Model 1, even though it is a bit taller. As we can see, we can see there that the Knockout is just a little taller, but because of the thinness of the knife, it actually carries smaller than the Rat Model 1. And onto our blade. Now on this model we have the black coated from Kershaw blade in 14C28N Sandvik. And 14C28N is an acceptable steel. It's definitely a good steel that sharpens up well and is not terribly hard to sharpen and has a fair amount of corrosion resistance. Prior to encountering things like S30V and D2, good quality D2, Sandvik was one of my favorites. It would hold an edge, a fine edge, for a reasonable amount of time, and then it would stay sharp enough to work with for the rest of the day once it started losing that really fine edge, so that you could get it back to the sharpener and bring that fine edge back up, or strop, or whatever you needed. So I really enjoyed the Sandvik steel. It would hold that fine edge for me in my circumstance for several days before I needed to really get in there and strop it back up or sharpen it back up. And our blade is 3.1 inches long, of course, just past that 3-inch limit that so many of you have. Now, another interesting thing, and this has to do with the way I measure knives, and I'm usually fairly consistent with what the knife makers come up with. But I measure from the front of the knife, so I measure from this point right here to the tip of the knife to get the blade length. And then, of course, I measure from here to here to get the edge length, which is not completely factual because the edge length would actually be measured around the curve here. But that would make the measuring kind of hard to do, so I don't do that. But here's what you come up with. 3.1 inches from here to here, and 3.22 inches from the heel of the blade to the tip of the blade measured this way. So that's what you've got. And we have a blade stock thickness of 0.122, so fairly standard blade stock thickness. And if we can see on this old black blade, we got swedges cut up here on both sides of the knife, and then it comes down to our point. Got a nice little diamond shape right there, and a flat grind right up to those swedges. So what is that? 3/4 of the way up or better? So it slices pretty good. The only hindrance here is the black coating on the blade. And if you're cutting softer materials, that is going to give you a problem in your slicing. But overall, it's a very, very nice blade shape, very nice blade design. And as always with US-made Kershaws, whenever it arrived from the factory, it was pretty darn sharp. I've, of course, sharpened it up since then, and at this point, it's extremely sharp. But from the factory, it was pretty sharp too. And from here, we're going to go to our pause and read card, and I'll be right back with you. Alright, this thing runs on a standard pivot. Nothing special there. It's got a set of, I believe they're phosphor bronze bearing bushings down there. And we have the lock mechanism. The lock mechanism is where it gets interesting. Now, first off, we can see that the knife is centered up pretty darn well. It's kind of hard to get it there on the camera, but it is centered pretty dang well. And it responds well to little tweaks in the pivot. But the lock mechanism is where it gets interesting. We have an aluminum handle here. This piece here, the dark colored piece, is steel. And it's steel for a reason. We couldn't lock the knife up with aluminum. One, you couldn't keep the spring in it. And secondly, it's too soft. You'd end up galling it or wearing it away too quickly against the steel blade. So what Kershaw has done is they cut this out of the aluminum and then cut a piece of steel that fits right in there. And this piece of steel has some more steel that goes down inside the handle material. And under this clip, there are two places where that piece of steel screws in and gives us our subframe lock. So what does that give us? Well, it gives us a knife that weighs under 4 ounces for this size knife, which is pretty impressive, especially at the cost. You know, this is a knife that sells on the street for around 50 bucks, and you're getting a full aluminum handle with all the little flourishes, and it weighs under 4 ounces. That doesn't happen that often, even with the G10 knife with steel liners and some of the other ways that they've tried to reduce weight. You usually end up 4.5 ounces, somewhere in there. So if weight is important to you, but you still want a big knife, the Kershaw Knockout, now it may be your cup of tea. And anyhow, so what we get, and again, this dark knife is really hard to see here. The only problem I had with it is Lockup is a wee bit early. It's around 20%. I'd like to see 30, maybe 40 on most of these. But, you know, it locks up good and solid with no play in any direction, so I think you're going to be just fine with it. Now, one thing to be aware of if you are a really, really hard user, they've got this area right here raised quite a bit over the other side of the scale. So your knockout portion is raised up. And if you're getting into things really hard, that can create this deal where you're putting torque like this on the knife and it will unlock. I have seen complaints about that. I have never ever had it happen to me on any of the knives that have been complained about, but something to be aware of. As far as our ergonomics, as always, Kershaw does a good job here. We've got the flipper tab to keep you from running up on the blade, provides a little more safety, and the knife just fits in the hand really well. Now, there isn't any jimping anywhere on this, but it doesn't need it. Whenever you lay it in your hand and get your hand wrapped around it, you are locked in solid, and everything fits pretty darn good. And you can get your thumb up here, and it's just wide enough there and shaped well enough there to get a hold of your thumb. It's not something where you're going to be slipping around. And as Kershaw and Spyderco almost always do, it just doesn't really matter how you get a hold of the knife. It's fairly comfortable. Now, is it perfect in every one of them? No, none of them are. But it is more than comfortable enough to get the job done in just about any grip you're going to get on it. And our action, of course, is Kershaw's Speed Safe system. And what that means is we have a torsion bar in here. Acts like a spring, but it is a torsion bar. Whenever the knife's closed, it's putting pressure on the knife blade to stay closed. Whenever you start to push on the flipper, you pull so far, and you kind of roll it over a pivot point, and the torsion bar takes over and pushes the blade out. Now, it only pushes it out about 90 degrees, but that's enough speed to get it to open all the way. Nice thing with the Knockout. Thumb studs, right? Well, they're useful thumb studs. You can use the thumb studs to get the knife open, which is much better than some assisted knives that have thumb studs that you can't even, they're placed so badly you can't do anything with them. And another thing, there's going to be some people complain about this, but I don't think it's too bad. It's much better than many knives. Our thumb studs are in line with the edge, but with the way you get a hold of this thing and the way you're going to be cutting with it most of the time, the way your hand falls on the knife, you're going to be cutting like this most of the time, and it's not going to be a problem. However, they are in line with the heel of the blade. And while we're talking about that, you guys fuss about me fussing about this, but I'm going to fuss about it anyhow. Look down there at the heel of that edge. Kershaw has almost perfectly executed that sharpening choil. It is, if it were my knife and I were going to keep it, I would extend that sharpening choil out just 1/10 of an inch or so and make it perfect. But since this belongs to Todd Knife and Tool, we're not going to do that because I don't want to take the black coating off under here. And it didn't hinder me from getting the blade sharp all the way to the back. It just has a little bit of kick up right there on your sharpened edge. Alright guys, that's the Kershaw Knockout. If you're looking for a bigger EDC knife that comes at a reasonable cost, the Knockout is definitely a good option. You got the Sandvik 13C28N, I believe, steel in it, and it's a well-built knife, just like all US-made Kershaws. It's well-built, works good. I'm not a huge fan of the olive drab and black like we have here. If I had one of my own, it would be the black and regular satin or stonewash. I forget which blade that is. But this one belongs to Todd Knife and Tool, so a big thanks to Todd Knife and Tool for sending this up here for us to look at. And it's a good one, guys. Anyhow, I appreciate y'all stopping by to talk knives with me for a few minutes. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe here and at Todd Knife and Tool. We are getting close to running that contest, so if you're into possibly winning the first Todd Knife and Tool blade to go out to the public, then get subscribed here and get subscribed over at Todd Knife and Tool. And you have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time.